I'm Tracy. Sitting in the garden of the Hargrove estate on a crisp autumn afternoon, I close my eyes and listen to the steady, strong heartbeat of Julian, the young man who's become so dear to me. It's the same rhythm I once heard when my son, Ethan, was a baby, lulling him to sleep in my arms. The realization still takes my breath away, even after all these years. 15 years ago, my life was shattered in an instant. My husband, David, and our 8-year-old son, Ethan, were on their way to a fishing trip just outside our hometown of Portland. Ethan was so excited, clutching his little tackle box, his laughter filling the air as they left the house. I kissed them goodbye at the door, never imagining it would be the last time I'd see them together. An hour later, the phone rang. A truck had swerved on the wet highway and crashed into their car. David was killed instantly, and Ethan was barely alive, rushed to Maine General Hospital for emergency surgery. When the officer told me the news, my knees buckled beneath me. The rest of that day was a blur of flashing lights, the antiseptic smell of the hospital, and the sound of my own heart pounding in my ears. In the ICU, Ethan lay still, pale and surrounded by tubes and wires. I held his tiny hand, whispering over and over that I was there, that he was safe, and that he just needed to wake up. But he never opened his eyes again. After 48 agonizing hours, the doctors told me what I already feared. There was no brain activity. My precious son, the reason for my existence, was gone. Then, the surgeon asked me a question that shattered what little strength I had left. There was a 5-year-old boy, Oliver, waiting for a heart transplant. Without it, he would die within days. Ethan's heart was strong and could save his life.
I stared at them, numb.
How could they ask me to make this decision when my world had just fallen apart? That night, I sat beside Ethan's bed, tracing the soft curls at his temple, replaying every moment of his short life. As dawn crept through the hospital windows, I finally understood. Ethan's story didn't have to end here. Even if I would never hear his laugh again, a part of him could live on, beating inside another chest. With a trembling voice, I signed the papers, begging the doctor to make sure the heart went to someone who would live a full, beautiful life. I held Ethan close one last time, breathing in the faint scent of soap and sunshine on his skin. "You're not leaving me," I murmured through tears. "You're just going somewhere I can't follow. Keep living, my love. Even if you're not here, keep living." When the surgical team wheeled him away, the silence in the hospital was unbearable. I stumbled out into the cold October morning, clutching the small wooden horse I'd carved for Ethan on his 7th birthday. It was all I had left of him. The next 15 years were a blur of grief and struggle. I received a small disability check that barely covered the rent, and I took odd cleaning jobs that left me exhausted. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment filled with memories of Ethan and David. I couldn't bear to throw anything away. I never remarried. The thought of starting over felt like a betrayal to Ethan. I withdrew from the world. Friends stopped calling, and the neighbors barely remembered my name. I existed in the shadow of who I once was, going through each day like it was a heavy burden. My days settled into a predictable rhythm. I woke before sunrise, made tea in the chipped mug Ethan had painted in kindergarten, and walked to the corner store for discounted groceries. In the evenings, I'd sit by the window, watching the lights in Portland, wondering if the boy with Ethan's heart was out there. But things were getting worse. The disability check and the cleaning jobs were barely enough to make ends meet. Some months, I had to choose between buying groceries and getting my medication. Then, one day, I found a notice from my landlord on my door, warning me of eviction if I didn't pay the overdue rent. I stared at the paper, my hands trembling. 15 years ago, I had lost everything that mattered. Now, I was about to lose the little that remained. 2 weeks later, a glimmer of hope appeared. A woman from a cleaning agency called to offer me a part-time housekeeping job for a wealthy family in the Boston suburbs, the Hargroves. The pay was much better than anything I'd earned in years, and it included transportation. I hesitated. I'd been hiding from the world for so long, and the thought of entering the home of strangers filled me with dread. But eviction was at my doorstep, and I didn't have the luxury of pride. 3 days later, I found myself on a train heading south. The ride to Boston felt like traveling to another planet. Portland's modest streets faded into the distance, replaced by sprawling estates and manicured lawns. When the taxi dropped me off at the Hargrove estate, I stood frozen at the edge of the driveway. The mansion loomed above me, with its pale stone walls, arched windows, and ivy climbing up the sides. The gardens were perfectly sculpted, and the air smelled of roses and old money. The door opened before I could knock. A woman in a crisp blouse and tailored slacks, Mrs. Hargrove, stood there. Her expression was polite but distant. "You're the new housekeeper?" she asked, her tone cool and measured. I nodded, clutching the strap of my worn canvas bag. "Yes, ma'am." She swept her gaze over me, as if assessing a piece of furniture. "We expect our home to be maintained to a certain standard. Floors spotless, surfaces free of dust, silver polished weekly. I don't tolerate shortcuts or excuses. If something is beyond your abilities, tell me immediately." I murmured that I understood. She then added, "My son, Oliver, lives here as well. He's very busy with his studies at Harvard and doesn't need distractions. Please keep your interactions with him to a minimum." The words stung, but I lowered my eyes and nodded. The days that followed settled into a new rhythm. I spent hours dusting bookshelves, polishing brass fixtures, and scrubbing tiled floors. The work was exhausting, but I didn't complain. It was a job that paid, and that was all that mattered for now. One afternoon, while I was wiping down the banister on the second floor, a voice startled me. "You must be Tracy." I turned to see a young man standing at the end of the hall, dressed casually in jeans and a soft blue sweater. His expression was open and warm. "I'm Oliver," he said, offering a smile that reached his eyes. "Sorry if my mom scared you off. She's very particular." I chuckled softly. I gathered that. Oliver leaned against the wall, studying me with a curious tilt of his head. "I'm an architecture student, final year at Harvard. I'm supposed to be drafting a project right now, but I've been staring at a blank page all morning. You ever have days like that?" I blinked, caught off guard by how easily he spoke to me. "More than I can count," I replied quietly. After that, I began to see Oliver more often. Sometimes he'd pass through the kitchen with a cup of coffee and ask about my day. Other times, he'd nod politely as I vacuumed the living room and returned to his sketchbook. Then, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, I was dusting the parlor when Oliver sat down at the grand piano in the corner and began to play. It was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece I hadn't heard in years. The melody was tender and aching, and each note seemed to reach into the deepest part of my soul. I froze mid-motion, the rag slipping from my hand as tears welled in my eyes. I didn't know why I was crying. Maybe it was the way the music brought back memories of Ethan, or the strange, almost familiar ache in my chest as I watched Oliver's fingers glide across the keys. When the last note faded, Oliver glanced over and noticed me standing there, eyes glistening. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" he said softly. I swallowed hard and managed a nod. "Yes, it is." Later that evening, as I folded linens in the laundry room, my colleague, Mrs. Thompson, joined me. She was a kind, hearted woman in her 60s. "You like the boy?" she said knowingly. I shook my head quickly. "I don't even know him." Mrs. Thompson smiled faintly. "Doesn't matter. People feel it when a soul is good. Oliver's a good one, but he's been through more than you'd think. Sickly as a child, doctors weren't sure he'd make it. And Mrs. Hargrove, she lost a baby once. A little girl, heart condition, never got over it." The words settled heavy in the room. Oliver, frail as a child, and a mother who had once lost a baby. The ache in my chest deepened, though I couldn't explain why. I only knew that something about this house, about this boy, was pulling at a thread buried deep inside me, one that hadn't been touched in 15 years. One afternoon, as I was dusting Oliver's bedroom, my hand froze mid-air. On the second shelf, tucked between a row of architecture textbooks and an old leather-bound journal, was a small wooden horse. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My heart slammed against my ribs, and the rag slipped from my fingers and floated to the floor. I stared at the toy as if it were a ghost. It was small enough to fit in a child's palm, carved from pale maple, its surface smooth but worn from years of being held. On its flank, barely visible, was a faint scar, a slip of the knife I'd made years ago and never sanded down. I reached out a trembling hand and lifted the toy, turning it over slowly. On the underside, the faint remnants of E.C. Ethan Carter were still visible. My knees gave out, and I sank to the floor, clutching the horse to my chest. It was impossible. I had buried this part of my life 15 years ago. The hospital had taken Ethan's belongings when they prepared his body for organ donation, and I had assumed they were lost forever. How could this toy be here in Oliver's room? The sound of footsteps in the hallway snapped me out of my shock. I scrambled to my feet, still clutching the toy, just as Oliver pushed the door open. He stopped when he saw me, his eyes dropping to the small horse in my hands. "Oh," he said with a soft, almost wistful smile. "You found it." I blinked at him, my mouth dry. "I'm sorry. I was just—" "It's okay," Oliver interrupted gently, stepping closer. "That little guy has been with me for as long as I can remember. I call it my good luck charm. It came from a hospital. I was told it was a gift from the boy whose heart saved me and his mom. I don't know who they were. No one ever told me their names, but I like to think they were kind, brave people who would want someone else to live, even when they'd lost everything." I turned away, blinking back tears. I wanted to tell him that I was that mother, that Ethan was the boy whose heart now beat inside his chest. But the words lodged in my throat, too heavy to lift. Oliver placed the horse gently back on the shelf. "I've had dreams about him," he said quietly. "The boy. I don't know what he looks like, but sometimes I feel like he's still here, like he's part of me." I couldn't stay in the room a second longer. I mumbled something about needing to finish the laundry and hurried out, my breath ragged and uneven. In the empty laundry room, I gripped the edge of the counter, trying to steady myself. Every beat of my heart echoed with the same realization. Ethan's heart is here. It had never left this world. It had been beating inside Oliver Hargrove all along. I barely slept that night. The wooden horse burned into my memory. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's small hands clutching it, felt the weight of his head against my chest, and heard his laugh echoing through our old home. The next morning, I moved through my tasks on autopilot. Oliver passed me in the hallway and offered his usual warm smile. But now, just looking at him made my throat tighten. Every gesture, every laugh, every absent-minded hum of a melody carried traces of Ethan. Later that week, Mrs. Hargrove appeared in the doorway of the laundry room. "I've noticed you lingering where you don't need to be," she said, her voice sharp and clipped. "This is a place of work, not a space for idle curiosity. Do what you're paid for and don't involve yourself in matters that don't concern you. You don't belong in Oliver's world. You're an employee, nothing more, and when your tasks are finished, you will leave through the service door like everyone else." The words stung, but as I studied her, I noticed something beneath the frost and steel of her tone. It was fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of losing the son she had almost lost once before. For the first time, I didn't feel anger toward her. I felt an ache of recognition. We were both mothers shaped by loss, both terrified of what might happen if the past collided with the present. That night, I walked to the small stone church on the corner of my street. The pews were empty, and the stained, glass windows glowed faintly in the setting sun. I slid into the back row and folded my hands, but no words came at first. Finally, in a whisper that trembled through the empty space, I prayed, "God, I don't know what to do. I don't want to hurt him. I don't want to lose him. Please show me the right thing. Tell me if I should speak, or if silence is my burden to bear." Tears slipped down my cheeks. In that quiet sanctuary, I felt a stillness, a sense that for now I didn't need to know everything. I only needed to stay. So, I made my choice. I would keep working, dust the shelves, and polish the silver. I would walk past Oliver in the hall and smile when he smiled at me. And even if he never knew who I was, even if the truth remained locked inside me forever, I would stay close to the heartbeat that had once lulled my little boy to sleep. One crisp autumn afternoon, Oliver found me in the garden, kneeling by the hydrangeas with a pair of pruning shears. "You're quiet," he said, crouching beside me. "I like that about you. Most people in this house are always rushing somewhere." I offered a small smile, but kept my eyes on the plants. "Can I tell you something?" Oliver asked after a pause. "Something I don't really talk about with people." I nodded. He drew in a breath, his gaze distant. "When I was little, I almost died. I was 5. My heart was failing, and the doctors said there was nothing they could do. My parents were preparing for the worst. Then, a donor heart became available. A little boy younger than me died in an accident. I don't know his name. I don't know anything about him really, just that his mother agreed to donate his heart, and that's the reason I'm still here. Sometimes I wonder if I'm living for 2 people, like maybe part of him is still alive inside me." I turned my face away so he wouldn't see the tears welling in my eyes. I wanted to tell him that he was living a life Ethan would be proud of, that Ethan had been gentle and kind just like him. But the words stayed locked inside me. That night, when I returned to my apartment, I found an envelope taped to my door. It was a final notice from my landlord. I had 3 days to pay the overdue rent or vacate the apartment. The paper slipped from my fingers and floated to the floor. I sat down hard on the edge of my bed, the room spinning around me. The thought of leaving Portland, of leaving Oliver, felt like losing Ethan all over again. The next morning in the laundry room, Mrs. Thompson noticed my red eyes and trembling hands. "What's wrong, honey?" she asked gently. I tried to brush it off, but she wasn't fooled. After a moment, she sighed, reached into her apron pocket, and pressed a small envelope into my hand. "Take it," she said firmly. "I've been saving a little over the years. It's not much, but it'll help you get through this month." I shook my head immediately. "I can't accept this." "You can and you will, Mrs. Thompson said, her voice warm but unyielding. "You're meant to be here. I don't know why, but I feel it. And remember, the darkest night always comes before the dawn." I stared at the envelope, tears blurring my vision. Pride told me to refuse, but something stronger, something desperate, told me to accept. That evening, I stood in my small apartment, clutching the money Mrs. Thompson had given me. It wasn't enough to change my life, but it was enough to buy me time. One quiet Tuesday afternoon, while I was dusting the upstairs study, a stack of leather-bound folders slipped and spilled their contents across the floor. As I knelt to gather the papers, my eyes caught a familiar phrase: "Cardiac transplant, October 10th. My breath stopped. I froze where I knelt, my fingers tightening around the page. The rest of the document blurred before my eyes. Oliver Hargrove, age 5, congenital heart failure. Donor heart received on October 10th, 15 years ago. The same day Ethan had died." I pressed the paper to my chest and closed my eyes, my whole body trembling. I didn't need any more proof. The wooden horse, the warmth in Oliver's smile, the Chopin nocturne, they had all led here. The heart beating inside Oliver was Ethan's. The sound of footsteps behind me made me jolt. "I see you found it, Mrs. Thompson's gentle voice said. I turned, startled, clutching the papers. But she didn't look angry. She only sighed and eased herself into the chair across from me. "I knew who you were the day you walked in," she said softly. "I was at the hospital that night. I was there when they brought Oliver in, and I was there when they